10 years ago, I purchased my first investment property for $720,000. Over the last 10 years, I've since built a portfolio worth over $40 million, but one thing I can tell you is it was not all sunshine and roses. I made some huge mistakes. If I look back on my journey, there's some massive things that I would change. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through the last decade of investing, what I would do the same, what I would do differently, all of the lessons that I've had, what you can implement to scale your portfolio, and what is in store for the future. So let's not waste any time. Let's get straight into it. Today, as I record this video, I am 29 years old. We are in 2025, and we're going to go back all the way to 2015, which is essentially when I was 18, turning 19 years old, and I purchased my first property. Now, one of the first things I always get, the first things people say is, Jack, how did you purchase your first property at 18? Most people when they're 18 don't have any money. And I'm very glad that you asked. You'll have to take one step back before 2015. I got kicked out of school in 2013. I worked 2013, 2014, and 2015 as a laborer in the construction industry. And the only reason I worked there to begin with was because I couldn't work anywhere else because I didn't have a license when I got kicked out of school. I couldn't get a job anywhere. And fortunately, they said, yeah, we'll take your young, silly ass on and you can be a laborer. So that was the thing that really got me started. It was before I bought the property. You obviously need to earn an income. You obviously need to save. Now, I stayed at home. I had very little expenses and I saved my first deposit. Now, when I bought my first property, I had give or take $100,000 to $120,000 of cash that I'd saved over the previous 3 years of working. And for context, I was on around about $80,000 to $90,000 a year over that period of time. I started on a little bit lower, and by the time I got to 2015, I think it was a little bit higher than that. But on average, I would say I was on $80,000 to $90,000 a year, working 6 days a week, working roughly 10 to 11 hours a day. So really good overtime. Obviously, Saturdays was time and a half and double time. And that's why I earned really good money. Because a lot of people are like, well, how do you earn that sort of money at 18? It's because I worked in a job where you could work a lot of overtime and obviously get paid really well. So 2013, I got my first job, and then 2015 comes around, and that is when I buy my first property. So if I look at the property right now and I still own this asset, I would never have bought this property today if I knew what I knew back then. The property that I purchased was a 1.5 to 2 bedroom apartment in the suburb of Coogee in Sydney. It's in the eastern suburbs, and fundamentally, it actually is an okay asset. I got the main thing right, which is it was in the right location. Coogee, great suburb, eastern suburbs. A rising tide lifts all ships, so obviously Coogee is a suburb that consistently grows. But if I look at the individual asset, there are a lot of things that are not so great about it. One of the main things I got right is it's literally 300 to 400 meters from the beaches on a street called Bream Street. It's in a small block of 12 apartments. There's no lifts, gyms, pools, or anything like that. There's never been any major special levies or anything bad, but it is a ground floor. Well, it's actually a subterranean apartment because the road is here and the apartment block is here. So you walk in and then go downstairs. Subterranean, it is cold, it's dark, it doesn't have parking, and it's a small apartment. But it is what got me started. So I bought that apartment for $720,000. I put in a 10% deposit, and I believe I paid a little bit of mortgage insurance, and I believe I saved on stamp duty back in 2015 with the first home buyer incentives. But this is what got me started in real estate. It was this first $720,000 property. The reason that I bought in Coogee is because I had a guy that I was following at the time who ended up becoming my mentor, which I'll talk through in just a minute. He bought all of his investments and he had a big portfolio in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. So I thought, well, he's buying all his there. I should follow him. And that is what I did. 720 grand. I was 18, turning 19 years old. And this is what got me started. So the lesson from this year, knowing what I know now, is I would never buy that property again today. But being 18, 19 at the time and buying this first property, it was a thing that got me started in property investing. And that property now I still own, like I said, it's worth about 1.35 million. I just actually refinanced it and did an equity release, and it's never not been rented. It's been a good asset by and large. So that is where I started. That is the key to everyone who wants to get into investing. Now, if you were young like me, amazing. Save hard. Don't go out. Don't do dumb shit. Don't spend money on dumb shit. save your money as much as you possibly can and buy that first asset, because the earlier you do it, the better your life is going to be, because the longer you're going to be in the market. And you also have a lot less life baggage when you are young, right? You don't have a partner generally. You don't have any expenses. You definitely don't have kids. All of that stuff happens later in life. And when that stuff starts to stack on, this becomes significantly harder. So that was 2015. About 18 months later, in 2017, I purchased my second property. In early 2017, I'd had my first property for around 18-ish months. And that first property that I bought had grown from, that was a terrible drawing, from 720K, I believe, to about 900K. Now, the Sydney property market at this point in time was going through some really strong growth. So it had some equity in it, about $180,000 worth of growth. And that is what then led me on to buy my second property. Now, I mentioned that I was following a guy, and that's the reason I bought my first property in Sydney. So for the second property, between 2015 and 2017, this guy that I mentioned, his name is Chris, I got much closer to him. I started to go to his events. I actually got mentored by him, and he had a buyer's agency, of which I decided to engage in 2017 to buy my second property. And the reason I did that is because I trusted that he could get, one, a better deal than I could, two, he had way more market knowledge, and three, I wanted to get closer to the sun. I wanted to get closer to people who had influence, who had money, who had the life that I wanted, because I knew there could be no downsides to that. So I didn't just pay for the buyer's agent service, I paid for exposure to that world. Okay, so that property again was a 2-bedroom apartment. It was in Maroubra this time, which is the next suburb down from Coogee. It was a little bit more expensive at $875,000, but it was actually in the same block of apartments that Chris also owned it. So it made me feel very cool. Now, a few things on this. This property I would not change a thing with. Okay, so what I didn't get right in the first one, because I did it myself and I knew nothing, the second one didn't have those issues. So the things that the second property had that the first one didn't was, the second property was also a 2-bedroom apartment, but it was 2 good-sized bedrooms. It was on a great street. It was also in a boutique block. The block had just been renovated. It had parking. It had views of, or it has, I should say, views of the ocean and the beach, and it was full of light. So everything that my first apartment didn't have, this apartment did. And this apartment now in 2025 has also just been revalued. It's been rated for about just under 1.55 million. And I've just done a cash out there as well. So it's performed really well. It's grown by around about $650,000 in 8 years. Obviously between 2015 and 2017, my income had grown. I'd gone from being a laborer in the construction industry to being a plant operator or a machine operator, which meant my wages increased. I was doing a lot more overtime. And that's what then allowed me to also get more debt, right? Because I used equity from this property to buy this property, and the bank lent me the money to be able to do that. The other thing to note is during this time, interest rates were going down, which meant obviously serviceability was increasing. Similar to the situation we're in right now. We're in an environment where rates have increased, but now they're starting to creep down. Every time a rate comes down, that gives you more serviceability. And that is one of the keys, right? One of the keys to, I believe, my investing success is that I have been very consistent. I've always put myself in a position to be able to make the next move when the time is right. So by buying the first property, that grew in value, that gave me the equity. And then by making sure I was staying on the ball, keeping my finger on the pulse, that then allowed me, when I had the serviceability, to then buy that next property. So between the two assets, I had give or take $1.7 million worth of debt. They were both investments, so it wasn't just my income, it was the rental income, and I was still living at home, so I had minimal expenses. Okay, so that was property number 2. Again, very straightforward. I did use a buyer's agent for that property, and it was one of the best decisions I've made. It cost me, $25,000-$30,000 back then to use the buyer's agent. And that has paid dividends, not just from the property growth, but it also got me a lot closer to that circle. And me and Chris are still very, very good friends today. Year 3 of my investing journey. This is when I did nothing because of a few reasons. 1, I hadn't really increased my income. 2, I didn't really have any equity to be able to use out of the other 2 properties. And 3, I just couldn't do anything, right? That was the reality of it. So I had 2 properties at this time. And I definitely was thinking about buying my next property, but I just wasn't in the position to be able to do it. Really, the main reason is I didn't have serviceability. My income had sort of capped out at what I was able to earn in my current role at the current business. And from what I'd learnt from Chris and everyone around that world, the key to unlocking that next property was increasing my income. So that is what I focused on. I looked at my current situation and I said, hey, how am I able to earn more money? And I had two options. Option one was to go into the mines and move locations completely. And option two was to go in and work in the tunnels in Sydney. That was when they were doing the North Connect tunnel and I think a few other tunnels. So I could go and work in the tunnels and I could double or triple my income overnight, but work crazy hours, nights and all the rest of it. Or I could go and work in the mines, either fly in, fly out, or drive in, drive out. It just so happened to be that during this period of time, I met a girl who happens to still be my partner now, who lived in Newcastle. So I thought, well, I can move to Newcastle. I think there's mines in Newcastle. So I didn't work in the tunnels. I worked in the mines. And by doing that, I ended up getting about a 40% increase in my income, which obviously increased my ability to service debt. So during this year, all I did was I increased my income, like I said, and I just waited and allowed my portfolio to grow in the marketplace. Like I said, I had $1.7 million worth of assets or thereabouts, and they were growing, let's say at 7 or 8% per annum. And all I needed to do was increase my income, which is exactly what I did. So I moved from Sydney to Newcastle. Again, I had very little expenses outside of the mortgages, but because they were renting really well, they weren't really costing me all that much. And I was still living at home until I moved to Newcastle. And then also, this is a really key thing. When I moved to Newcastle, with my girlfriend, or ended up becoming my girlfriend. I didn't go and rent a big house, or I didn't go and rent somewhere by myself or with her. We lived in a share house with 4 other people. So we had a bedroom and then 3 other people also had 3 other bedrooms. So when I moved out of home, the only thing that changed was the rent amount that I was spending, because I was still paying for my own food when I lived at home with mum and dad, but I wasn't paying board or rent. So when I moved out, I didn't all of a sudden go from paying nothing to paying $600 or $700 or $800 per week. I moved out and I think our room cost like $250 a week, split between 2 people. So it cost me like $125 a week, plus some bills like internet and shit like that, which is, in the grand scheme of things, next to nothing. So I kept my expenses as low as I possibly could, which was good for 2 reasons. 1, for surplus cash flow, and 2, for serviceability. Okay, so that was year 3. Now we're going to move on to year 4, which is actually when I made my next move. So I had 2 properties in Sydney. They had grown to give or take $2 million in total value. So I had a couple of $100,000 of extra equity in them over that 24-month period. And because now I was living in Newcastle and I was learning about that real estate market, I had seen the opportunity that was there. I essentially took the playbook that I'd used in Sydney, which was buying good quality apartments next to the beach, which is what Chris had taught me, in areas where there was a huge demand for tenants, they're never vacant, that they grow consistently over a period of time, and you're next door to houses worth 5, 10, 15, 20 million bucks. So I thought, well, if that works in Sydney, surely this has to work in Newcastle, right? Because Newcastle was the 6th to 7th largest city in Australia. There was houses there worth $3 to $6 million at the time. They're worth, 10, 15, $20 million now. I thought, well, if it works there, it should work here. So anyway, I got out of there in the market. I got pre-approved. Really key thing here as well is when I got pre-approved for the first 2 properties, I used the bank, the ANZ at Windsor. And when I went to buy my 3rd property, obviously I didn't live in Sydney anymore, but the ANZ wouldn't lend me any more money. So I said, okay, well, if the ANZ wouldn't lend me any more money, where should I go to next? I spoke to Chris, like I said, who was my mentor, and I said, Chris, who should I speak to? He said, hey, speak to this girl. She's an incredible mortgage broker who had never dealt with a mortgage broker before. She will sort you out. This girl's name was Alicia. I met with Alicia. Alicia said, yeah, we can definitely help with the approvals. This is what we need to do. There was a few things that needed to happen to the first 2 properties. They were cross-collateralized. We needed to uncross-collateralize them. We needed to do some equity releases. And we then needed to get approved for the 3rd property, but we couldn't get approved through a major lender because the first 2 were with ANZ. A major lender wouldn't lend me the money because of my serviceability constraints. So we had to go to a 2nd tier lender, which happened to be a lender called Liberty. Liberty was a 2nd tier lender that I purchased a 3rd property through. I used the exact same playbook that that I used in Sydney, and this has been one of my best investments. And since that point, I will also talk through this later on, but I've bought two more assets in the same building. So it was an apartment that I bought for $660,000, literally on the ocean. The apartment block is here, there is a road, and the ocean is here. Incredible. It doesn't get any better. It had views, it was a two-bedder, it was neat and tidy, but it could add value to the property. And I got it for a steal. And this is a big lesson. The reason I got it for a steal is because for the previous 5 years before I purchased the property, they were having massive strata issues. A few years prior to me buying it, there was a huge storm in Newcastle. The roof got ripped off the building, obviously caused massive dramas. And they had big dramas with the insurance company trying to get the roof replaced. Once the roof then got replaced, they had issues with the windows and the doors because the windows and the doors in the building were wooden, they weren't aluminium. And obviously when you're right next to the ocean, the sea just absolutely, and the weather, the climate just wrecks everything. So they had to get all the doors and the windows replaced. There was going to be a huge special levy on the building. They didn't know what that was going to be yet because they hadn't finalized quotes from builders. This apartment had been for sale for months and no one had bid at it, which didn't make sense to me. And it originally went to market for a much higher price. So what I did was I went to obviously look at the apartment, fell in love with it. I was like, this is crazy. In Sydney, this would be like a $2.5 million apartment. If that was on the beach in Coogee or on the beach in Bondi or on the beach in anywhere in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, it's a $2 to $2.5 million apartment every day of the week. And I thought, if I can buy this thing for like $600,000 to $700,000, it's a steal. But it had hairs on it, right? It had issues with strata. The strata report was horrendous because of all the stuff that had happened prior. So I thought, okay, what should I do here? Should I try and take the opportunity and potentially get myself into a lot of shit, or should I pass up on it? So what I did was, to find out more about what had happened instead of just reading a strata report, I got the details of two of the other owners in the building. And they were both the apartments at the front. I went and met them. And I sat down and I said, hey, I really want to buy this apartment, but I'm unsure about, what's happening in the building. Can you give me some more insight? And the girl that I met with in the building was actually the one dealing with all the issues with strata and the builders and all the rest of it. And once I got a detailed understanding of where they were at, roughly how much it was going to cost, because they did have initial quotes from builders, but they hadn't chosen one yet, I thought, this is not bad. What ended up happening was I bought the apartment for $660,000. There was then a $40,000 special levy that had to be paid to replace all the doors and windows, paint the building. But this wasn't a sunk cost because it was going to increase the value of the apartment because the building got painted. We had, beautiful stack of doors right on the beach. So it made sense. I was actually like renovating it. So I was all in for $700,000 and this $40,000 didn't get paid straight away. It got paid, I think, over like the next 12 to 18 months that I owned it. This apartment now is worth $1.2 million. So it's been a very, very good investment. It's grown by, $500,000. And I actually lived in this apartment for a period of time. Another thing, like I said before, I've been very strategic about keeping my living expenses as low as they possibly can be up until only recently. So I didn't just live in the thing by myself. I rented out the other bedroom, which meant, again, halved my living costs, halved my electricity cost, halved my internet cost because you go 50-50 with the other person who lives with you. The big lesson here was to not just look at things at face value. This property ticked all the boxes. Like I said, it was a small block of 6 apartments on the ocean. It had parking. It was top floor. It had incredible views. But the reason it hadn't sold was because it had strata issues, of which I had personally never faced before. But I did research. I spoke to Chris. He told me what to do. I went and met with the owners and all the rest of it. And like I said, this has turned out to be an incredible investment. And I've actually bought 2 more apartments in the block. So now I own 3, I own 50% of the building. And there is a play that I'm doing on this building, which I will talk through in a little bit of time. So that was year 4, and the downside to year 4, I now had, $3 million worth of assets or close enough to it, was I literally had no more borrowing capacity left. I'd already increased my income dramatically from moving to Sydney to Newcastle. I really couldn't increase my income all that much in the industry that I was in. I could potentially do fly in, fly out. I could potentially go back to Sydney and go into the tunnels, which I did think about. But there was no more really big jumps. I couldn't go from, $150,000, $200,000 a year to like $400,000 a year or $500,000 a year. So because of that, I said to my partner at the time, I said, look, I love Newcastle. I love you. I love, what I've done so far, and I also love property. Like, I was obsessed with it. Up until this point, I was going on podcasts and sharing my journey to date, again, because Chris, my mentor, also did a lot of media, so I was essentially just following the roadmap of what he had done. And I said, look, I really want to go back to Sydney, and I want to get back into property. Now, there was two things that I knew. One was property and business. There is an uncapped amount of money you can earn, but there is also a, floor to what you can earn as well, which is zero. So I thought, the way to increase my income would be to get into an industry where I am in full control of my income. Because obviously working in mining and construction, you are controlled by how many hours you can work in a day. Now, you're obviously on a good wage, you get awesome allowances, you can work overtime, you get double time, time and a half, and all the rest of it, night shifts. But there are still only so many hours in the day, which means I was capped at how much I could earn. For the next 2 years, all I did was I worked, I saved money. I actually went overseas during this time as well, my first big overseas trip. But I said 2 years, I'm moving back to Sydney and I'm starting in the property sector. So for the next 2 years, I didn't do anything in property as such other than one thing, which I will walk you through. It was, I think, about 12 to 18 months later, thereabouts, COVID hit. I was in property circles. I was meeting a lot of people in real estate because I was planning to move into the industry, obviously, so I was making connections. And because I was making a few connections, an agent rings me one day during COVID and says, I've got this development that I'm selling on behalf of a developer. Obviously, they want to continue to move stock because, well, I'm not sure if anyone remembers or anyone was in the real estate sector when COVID hit, but it was absolutely creaming it up until COVID hit, and then bang, all of a sudden overnight, no one wanted to buy real estate. No one wanted to do anything because of obviously how scary it was. So I get this call from this agent who says, hey, we're looking at doing a group deal with 10 to 15 of us. Would you be interested? You have to put in a $5,000 deposit. $5,000. You can buy one of the apartments. They're almost complete in a smallish block. And there's a lesson here. And you don't have to pay anything else until settlement. And settlement was round about 18 months away. So it was essentially an off the plan apartment, which I tell everybody now not to buy. Okay. And I should have known better as well because my parents also got stung with off the plan. But I was excited. I was ambitious. It was only $5,000 I needed to put down. And I could feel like I was still making progress, right? Because then I could say I had 4 properties, which, I did. So I went in on that deal, $5,000. I also got a few other friends and we went in. But here is how I assessed it, okay? I had to put $5,000 down. And essentially, in 18 months' time, I had to settle, okay? The two options were, I put the $5,000 down. The marketplace goes to absolute shit because when COVID hit, no one really knew what was going to happen. So I thought, okay, $5,000 down. Best case scenario, the market takes off over the next 2 years and everything's A-okay. I settle the apartment in 2 years' time and there's no hard feelings. The worst case scenario was the marketplace absolutely shit the bed over the next 2 years. And really my only risk was this $5,000, right? And the way that I thought about it, which I'm not sure is right or wrong, but this is how I thought about it. I thought if the marketplace gets really, really bad, assume that I rescind on the contract and I don't settle on it. I was unconditional, so then I could potentially be sued. The chance of that developer not going broke is very, very low. So I thought it's unlikely that developer is going to try and sue me if he's got major issues. So my worst case scenario was I'd sell $5,000, maybe I'd get sued, maybe I won. If I wasn't settling, there'd be lots of other people not settling. The best case scenario was I settled, I made some money, and then I would flog it straight away. Fortunately for me, the marketplace went absolutely batshit crazy. I think I paid around $550 for the 2-bedroom apartment off the plan, and I believe I sold it for just under $700. I think it was like $690. A few things that I would do differently here. One, I would never do this again because once I actually show you the net numbers, it didn't really make sense. But I paid $550, I sold it for $690, so I made $140,000 with my $5,000 investment. But because I actually exchanged unconditionally on the property, I was liable for the stamp duty on the $550. So that was $25,000-ish or $30,000-ish on top. So I had $30,000 in stamps I had to pay. I then on-sold it, but I used a real estate agent to on-sell it to a future buyer. It was the agent who was selling them all off the plan. So I believe that cost me around about $15,000 in sale cost. So that was $45,000. I had to pay conveyancing fees on the way out, then also conveyancing fees for the sale. So I think, again, that was around about $8,000 total. And then because it was an investment, I then had CGT payable on the gains. So out of the 140 that I made, it ended up being about 9 or 80 or 90 grand. Then I paid my CGT on that. And I turned 5 grand into around about $50,000, which look, is a 10x return, amazing. But at the end of the day, $50,000 is not a life-changing amount of money. And I probably wouldn't do it again because, you know, there was obviously risk involved. It could have been much worse if it didn't all turn out. But that is something that I did during the time where I had no serviceability because there was a deal that sort of fell on my lap. But I would not do that again, just as an FYI, because there was risk involved. And to make, you know, wasn't even 50,000. I made 45-ish thousand because I put 5,000 into the deal. Probably not a worthwhile thing, especially because during that same period of time, my other assets, assume they grew at 5% on $3 million, probably made 150, 200 grand by doing absolutely nothing. Now, like I mentioned just before, during this period of time, I went from mines, 2 years later, started in property. And it was just sort of during the whole COVID time, but post the scary part of COVID, and the real estate market went absolutely batshit crazy. Within the first 12 months of me working in the industry, I become the #1 performer from a fees point of view, writing fees point of view in the office that I worked in from zero. Remember, I come out of mining and construction, went into an industry that I'd never worked in before, and become the highest performer. And my income within the first 12 months about 4x'd what I did in mining, which I just thought was crazy because my goal when I started was just to match what I earned in the mines within year one, and I ended up 4x'ing that. So a few things that did. So I assume my income went to, I think it was around about $600,000 in fees that I wrote. I was in my own company, so I was a contractor back to the agency that I was working for. This then give me a massive amount of serviceability. I think it ended up giving me around $5 million in capacity. And I had the other 3 properties. And because I was holding those properties, which was here, here, and here, these properties had grown. And I believe I had around about $700K in available equity that I could cash out. Okay. Plus I had all this serviceability on top of what I had already borrowed. So what I did after 12 months of being in the industry, I went and refinanced my existing loans using the income that I had. I did a massive cash out, and then I went on a buying spree essentially because I was super excited. And this is one of the mistakes that I made because I had all this momentum in my life. I thought like I'd never do anything, you know, I was crushing it. And I had all this money sitting there in an offset account that I just refinanced, and I thought I'll be fine. And I went and spent all of it plus more on investing in more real estate. So I had about 700 grand of equity sitting in an offset account. I had also started my own company during this time as well. So I had left the previous firm that I'd worked at. I only worked there for 12 months. I worked there from the October of 2019 to the October of 2020, literally 12 months to the day. And then I started my own business, which wasn't actually a new business as such because I already had my own proprietary limited company set up that I was contracting to the other company for, but I essentially just was now using my own brand, not contracting to the other company. And the reason that's important is because when you work for an agency in the world that I work in, you generally pay commission splits. So hypothetically speaking, I made $600,000 in earned income or commissions, but the actually fees that I had written that year was about 1.2 million. So if that was my own business, I would have got the whole 1.2 million versus working for an agency, I give them 50% and I only kept 50%. So by starting my own business in 12 months after, I essentially could have done exactly the same fees, but gotten a 100% pay increase because I was no longer paying out commission splits. Obviously, there's more expenses and stuff that I had to take on, but I ran a really lean enterprise then. But this is what happened. So I went and bought one property for $750,000. This was just a block of land that I was going to build an asset on. Would I do this purchase again? Probably not. The reason I bought this one was because my childhood dream when I grew up in a location called Wilberforce on the Hawkesbury River, amazing place. As soon as I had enough money to go and buy a block of land on the river, I did it. So it was a vacant block of land. It had nothing on it. And I just got excited because I had money and I was like, I can finally buy a property on the river. I didn't even have a boat. I don't know why I did it, but I also bought a boat, of course, right? Because you can't have a property on the river without a boat, because that's dumb. So I bought it. It cost me 750 grand. I'm not sure if anyone knows what happens when properties are really close to the water, but they potentially can flood, okay? It had never flooded in the whole time that I lived there for like 21, 22 years of my life. And within the first 24 months of me owning this property, it flooded 3 times. Okay, so I went through, I was spending all this money on doing beautiful landscaping and retaining and building, outdoor areas and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it all flooded, it all got fucked a few times, and it was not ideal. Okay, so would I buy this property again this early in my journey? Because I believe this was the 4th property that I purchased. No, I would not. And it's also cost me a huge amount of money, and it is still yet to be finished. By the way, this was purchased, many years ago, and I'm still building this thing. But I did buy it, so I did that for $750. I also bought another property, which was a penthouse in Newcastle. That cost me $2.6 million. And remember where I said just before, I spent all the money plus some? Yeah, I wasn't lying. I spent all the money plus some. So this required $150,000 plus stamp duty. This then required like $700,000, which is already over the $750 of equity release that I spent. And to top it off, I also bought an office building in Sydney for $6 million. And you're probably thinking, Jack, how did you buy all this shit together? You can see that my portfolio before this was probably like $4 to $5 million. I then bought 3 assets worth nearly $10 million. So I more than doubled my portfolio just in this 12 months. And I couldn't afford all of these things. 1, I couldn't service it. And 2, I didn't even have the cash to be able to settle them. I had the cash for all the deposits, but I didn't have the cash to settle them. So this one I got on a standard settlement. I settled it straight away. This $2.6 million penthouse I got on a delayed settlement, I believe, of 9 months. And this $6 million one I got on a 12-month settlement. So I was settling it a year later. Now, the $6 million purchase was an office building in Sydney that I've actually since sold. The plan here was to move out of the building that we were renting, because I said I started my own business. We were renting another building in Paddington. We're going to move into here. We rented out the front, which was the commercial, and it was attached to a terrace, which we also leased out. But there was not a chance I had the serviceability or the capital to be able to do that. So I went in with my business partner in the end at the time to purchase this asset 12 months later. The $2.6 million penthouse, I ended up settling. I used not just the equity that I'd released, but I also used some of my money that I had been earning to settle this. And the $750,000 I settled easily, but then that started requiring more and more money. Now, the big lesson for me this year is I just assumed that everything was always going to go in the upward direction. I felt like I could do no wrong. I started in construction. I bought 3 or 4 properties. My income was ever increasing. I was now hanging around all these super wealthy people, or at the time, they're much more wealthy than I was. And I was just buying all this stuff, and my life was incredible, and I thought I could do no wrong. So what I did was I overextended myself. That's the reality. I went and bought $10 or $11 million worth of real estate in 1 year when I didn't have the serviceability or the capital to be able to do it. I used all of my money plus money out of the business. So I left myself super lean, and then the marketplace started to change. So what then happened was my income started to drop. I then had a bigger team. I then had more expenses, and it was a really, really scary time because, I had all of these now assets that I didn't just have to settle, but I also then had to cash flow them. So the $2.6 million penthouse, I settled with a non-bank lender because I couldn't get the serviceability with major lenders. That is a very messy $2.6 million, but you get the point. Settled with a non-bank lender, extremely high interest rate. Obviously rates started to increase as well, so that had massive cash strain. A $6 million office, I ended up settling with my business partner, like I said. A few things happened with this asset, which I'll unpack in another video, but the valuation was fine, but the loan to value ratio that the bank was going to lend us decreased. So then we had to again use another non-bank lender to settle this, and the other one was with a major lender. But anyway, this was a very, very stressful time. And my lesson here is things will change. Always expect the worst because things will happen, right? I'm an ambitious guy. I want to keep scaling. I want to keep growing. But I need to make sure I grew in a way that wouldn't just, self-destruct. I could say that I had 15 to 20 million bucks worth of real estate now and all these really cool things, but I was super stressed. I was working my ring out, and fortunately it all worked out, but if it didn't work out, it could have been the end before it had even begun. So that was year 7, year 8 of my investing journey. They all sort of blended together because obviously I bought some in year 7 and then I settled on some in year 8. As we started to get into year 8, things started to get a little bit better with the business as well. We went through some choppy times. I started to earn more money. The business started to grow, and all of a sudden you think, hey, I'm back on the up. So in year 8 and year 9 of my investing journey, which was only the previous few years, a few things happened. I bought another office building for $3 million in Newcastle. Again, I got this on a delayed settlement, which is actually yet to settle. It settles later this year. I also started to buy some development sites. Again, big lesson here. So I bought one development site for $1.5 million. I bought another site for $1.1 million. Development site. I also bought another asset for $3.1 million, which again was a development site, which is yet to actually be developed. And over this same period of time, I also bought 2 more apartments in that building that I mentioned. So there's a $710,000 apartment, which was the one underneath the apartment that I first bought with the strata issues. And I only just bought this other one, and that settles next month. I paid $1 million for that one, believe it or not. So disregard that. It's not 600. I paid $1 million for the other apartment. The $3 million office building, that's in Newcastle. We bought this on a delayed settlement. We got it under an option agreement, and that settles later this year. Something that I've done relatively well is I've staged investments to be able to secure them, to get the benefit of them today, but not pay for them until tomorrow. So again, I got a delayed settlement on this, which was obviously beneficial because we've had, over 12 months worth of growth on that asset. Something we've gotten very lucky with this building, which we actually didn't realize. So I'm not going to say that I'm an expert for buying this property, but we purchased this asset. And it's where, Henderson works out of. It's where my building company works out of, and my property management business in Newcastle. It's a 3-story office building. And there was a DA that was approved on this many, many years ago. It was approved 20 years ago, but the construction certificate was about 14 years ago. Now, we thought it was all lapsed and none of it was relevant anymore. We didn't know it was there, but we thought, no, it's nothing. Anyway, we did some more due diligence into it post the transaction. Turns out that this building has a 7-story apartment building approved on the site. The construction certificate is active, and we can actually build the apartment building. So we bought it just based on an office yield of 5%. And it turns out it's actually a development site that we can develop down the track. So that was really, really cool. The $1.5 million development site, the lesson with this asset was, same thing, too early. All of these things require a level of focus. That's the issue. So you think, oh yeah, I'm in property, I've got a building company and all this jazz, let's go start developing properties. But it's not just simply going and developing properties. All of these things take time, they all take capital, and they take me away from my core thing, which is the property business that I run, the client services business. The $1.5 million development site was meant to only take 6 months it was already approved, so it was going to do a redesign and start building. Turns out that's actually taken 18 months. I didn't have any tenants in that property for the fast 18 months because I assumed I was going to do the build relatively soon after settlement. I got a delayed settlement on it. It didn't turn out that way. And I've only just started the construction of it. Demolition happened, maybe a month ago. So this will be like 3 years from when I've purchased it to when it will actually be complete. It was $8,000 a month, the mortgage on this property, and I had 0 tenants in it. So I was just forking out $8,000, which is fucking crazy. And it was too early. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have bought this too early. And I also shouldn't have bought this one as early as well, because I haven't even started building this. Same thing. I went through, got it approved, amazing. But then it's like, you got to get a construction certificate. Once you get the construction certificate, you have to get a building contract. Then there's generally a gap between what the lender will lend you to build and then obviously what you have to contribute. So that's more capital that it requires. You then have to cash flow the development for the whole period of time with no rental income, because obviously you can't rent something out that isn't built. It's very distracting. So this as a finished site is worth about 5.5-ish million, 5.6 I think the as if complete valuation is done. And this is the same. These are worth about $1.5-2 million a piece. So it's probably a $6 million site once it's built. But I did them too early. I should have just bought really good set and forget assets, or just bought these as future sites, rented them out, left them there, and then went down the track and developed them, as opposed to trying to do it all at once. Because you got to remember, I bought this then started it, right? I'm still running a business. I'm growing my business. I've got all these other properties. I'm still building that one on the river as well. Like, I just had shit happening everywhere, and it was very, very stressful. And there's been times where, you know, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul and all this jazz. So investing aggressively is fun and it can be super rewarding, but like, everyone sees the shiny, glossy stuff on the outside, but on the inside, it's very different to what it looks like on the outside. And that's when I speak to people, and I speak to, you know, literally hundreds and hundreds of clients every year. And they say, I want big portfolios. I want to have 10 million, 20 million, 30 million bucks worth of assets. And I say, amazing. Do you know the reality of that, right? Because I used to say the same thing. I want a massive portfolio. And then if I actually would have known the reality of the stress, the sleepless nights, and all the shit that goes into actually scaling this quickly, like this has all happened in 10 years and there's still more to add after this, I maybe would have rethought it, okay? So the lesson here is don't try and be a property developer if it's not your main game. Property development is not my main game because it's hard and it costs a lot of money, and often you can make just as much money by buying passive investments. Now, there was obviously the other development site that I bought, $3.1 million. I went in as a JV on this, 50-50 JV. That is still yet to come out of the ground. That's approved. We haven't even launched that yet. It's rented out. Very low rental yield. Someone is doing my rent vesting model in this building, paying $900 a week, and the mortgage on that I think is $13,000 a month. So amazing. As you can see, that's very negatively cash flowed. Now, getting to these other two. This is the apartment block. That is one of the best drawings Jack Henderson has ever done, by the way. This is the apartment building if you're looking at it from side on. Okay, so this was the first one that I bought here for $660. The balconies all look out at the beach. Okay, then I purchased this one for $710. Okay, this one happened 12 to 18 months after I bought the first one. These are both now valued at 1.2 mil based on a bank val, and I've cashed out the equity at a $1.2 million valuation on each of those, so 2.4 million combined. I've since bought this apartment here for $1 million. That settles next month. Let me tell you something interesting. Again, this is a lesson that I have learned that I would do differently. This apartment sold after I bought this one for $710 for like $630,000 only a few years ago. Obviously, I didn't buy it at the time because I had all this other shit going on. I had these development sites, I bought the office, and I was just distracted. And to be honest, I probably couldn't fund it at the time. So I was like, I'll just let it go. I've now bought it for $1 million. So I paid $400,000, almost more than what the previous owner did. And they've almost done nothing to it. A bit of paint made it a little bit tidier. So this cost me $400,000 by not acting on it. And my goal with this building is to buy the whole thing. So I've got 50% of the building now. I need to buy 1 to 2 more of them. Then I'll control the majority strata. The plan in the future is to develop it because it is on one of the most premium streets in the location. And I can turn it from either a 6 apartment block into maybe 3, luxury full floor apartments that might be worth $6 to $7 million a piece, or I could leave it there. There's many things I can do, but I want to acquire it because I'll probably be able to acquire the block in totality. So the purchase price here of $700 with the special levy plus 7's 1.4 plus $1 million's 2.4. These two front ones are probably worth 1.5 a piece. So say 3 million plus 2.4 is 5.4. This back one, who knows what I'll have to pay for it, but assume I could get the whole building for 6.5, 7 million bucks. The awesome thing about it is it's staged, so I don't have to have all the capital up front. If I wanted to go buy one of the other houses on the street, you need to have $7 to $10 million to be able to buy it straight away. So I can do it in a staged approach. You're going to get a much higher rental yield than if you just bought one dwelling. So obviously you've got 6 apartments here, so the holding costs are less. And then the future upside is extreme. So that is my plan with this, is to buy all 6. The lesson is by doing too much, you often can forego opportunities that are sitting there, right? So I couldn't buy this apartment here for $630,000 because I had so much other shit going on. And if I look back at all the other stuff that I've bought, maybe this would have been a better investment than some other things that I bought because, I just paid $400,000 more, right? In a very short period of time, which in comparison to what they paid, $630, they made $400. That's like 80%, 70 to 80% growth in that period of time. Extreme. And that's like literally 4 years, 3 years. So that's another lesson. By doing too much, you're gonna let opportunities go. So one of the really cool things Alex Hormozi says is, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So when you've got money and you're growing and, all these opportunities are coming at you, because now I've got a big brand, I'm in real estate, there's constantly shit coming at you. Everything looks like a nail. But where the real riches are is when you can actually say no to things because you know it's not the right. You have your investment mandate, you know what you're doing. And it's the same in business. Like when you're in business, everything looks like an opportunity, right? Because you could do this and make money, you could do this and make money, you could do this and make money. And often when you start doing all these other things, you then take attention away from the thing that makes you all your money and you start making less money. So that's one of my big lessons is stop trying to do too many things at once, because when you do too many things at once, it's actually worse than doing a few things really, really well. Now, there is a few more transactions. These have all sort of happened over the last 12 months, which is the year 10 of my journey. The most recent transaction, or one of the most recent transactions I've done, is probably the best transaction that I've done, and it's the way that I'll invest moving forward. It was a $5.5 million transaction. It was a farm / wedding venue. It's the best transaction I've done to date, I believe. Now, not because the results have been incredible since I've owned it, but the upside is next level. My partner is in events. She has a background in it, and I wanted a farm. And so I was like, hey, why don't we do a farm that is a wedding venue, and you stop doing events where you get paid $1,000 or $1,500 for an event, and we start charging people $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for a wedding. We bought the farm, $5.5 million. We've spent a lot of money on it. By doing things like this, you take away from your core business. I've had to inject a lot of capital into this thing, which I potentially could have injected into my own business. Who knows where the better return would be. But since buying this asset, we have booked, and this is as of this week, 62 weddings. I only settled on this in December of last year. So since January 1 of 2025, I'm now recording this in August of 2025, we've booked 62 weddings, roughly totaling $1.2, $1.3 million worth of gross revenue on a $5.5 million investment, right? So you can understand how this is going to be an incredible asset, because most assets cannot cash flow like this. It is an active asset. Obviously, these weddings aren't booking themselves. We're running ads. It's a beautiful property. We got to do site visits. We got to do all this shit, right? It takes effort. It's not a passive investment. But moving forward, this is the kind of asset that I will only be investing in outside of commercial buildings and a few more resis in that block of apartments and all the rest of it. But by and large, I'll be buying properties like this because there's a few things. By buying assets like that, you naturally just get the organic growth of the asset. So you get the growth of the asset, which you get in any property. Then on top of that, because you are generating an income from a business, you then get it's called a going concern valuation, because they will then look at the asset, not just based on the asset itself, but then also the income it's generating, and they will give you a cap rate. So you then get the growth in the asset from the income that it's producing. And this can potentially give you like 5x to 10x returns. No shit. If the property grows at 5, 6, 7% per annum, by generating an income and dramatically increasing the income of that business, you can increase the asset value by like 5 or 10 times. And this is what all of the big guys do, right? Not only on farms, but in like hospitality, people who own pubs. They can buy a pub that's not doing very, very well. They're not just paying for the real estate, but they're also paying for the business that operates out of that real estate. You think about someone like Justin Hems, they turn the venues around. It goes from being a negatively cash flow business to an extremely profitable business. Because there's now a profitable business operating out of the venue, that then dramatically changes the value of the asset, and you buy something for 10 million and sell it for 100 million. Like there's been plenty and plenty and plenty of those stories. You know, you just got to look at like recently the Byron Bay Hotel, I think it is, on the water. They're just off 140 million bucks. You look at like the history of that venue, and it's not just the asset itself, it's the income it generates. Obviously, they got poker machines and everything else. But this is the kind of asset now that I'm investing in, because it's not just the growth, but it's also the income. And because of what I learn in business and what I can do in business, I now have the resources to be able to do this kind of thing. I've pretty much summarized in pretty good detail the last 10-ish years of my investing journey. Now I look at this stuff, it's hard to believe that I've done all of this stuff in 10 years, right? But that's the thing. When you look back in hindsight, you're like, holy fuck. When you're in the time, it doesn't feel that fast. But the big takeaways for me, and the reason I think I've been able to do what I've done in the time frame, obviously the one big thing is income, right? Like you need to increase your income if you want to do things like this, because without income, without cash flow, there's none of this stuff. So it's easy for me to say that, but like if you're someone watching this and you're like, I want to grow a big portfolio, I want to create wealth, none of it happens without income. So you need to work out how to crack the code with income, how to continue to add more value to the world and continue to increase it. So that's the big one. And that's what I've been super focused on. The next one is having a mentor or mentors. The reason I say that is because probably the first 5 years of my journey, Chris was the roadmap I was following, right? It was like, what's Chris done? Let's just keep following him. It worked for him. It's got to work for me. From probably year 5, year 6 to now, it's been other people, okay? And when I say mentors, I don't mean I sit with them once a week and I go, hey, what am I doing for the next 5 years of my life? I mean, it's people that you look at and go, how can I emulate what they've done in my life and add my own little special sauce to it. So I mentioned like Justin Hems. Justin Hems is multi-billionaire, but I look at what he's done and I'm like, how can I do something similar in my niche? Alex Hormozy has been an incredible mentor to me through business, and that then transpires into property. A lot of different people that I've spoken to since I've had the rural property, the farm, in the farming world, of how they've increased the values of their assets. It's just very important to have someone that you can follow in their footstep. It doesn't mean you're going to do everything like they've done. It doesn't mean they've walked the same path you're going to walk because they might have done it 50 years ago, but it means you can definitely pull things from their journey and it makes it happen much faster. Another one is urgency. This is a double-edged sword, urgency, because I've said multiple times here, I shouldn't have done that. I went too hard. I left myself dry and all the rest of it. But without urgency, none of this shit happens, right? Like, you think about things, you wait for the right time. Oh, maybe I won't do that now. I'll wait for my cash buffers to get a bit bigger or whatever it is. The bigger the goal, the more urgency you need. The smaller the goal, the less urgency you need. If you have no goals, often you don't have any urgency, right? But I operate with huge amounts of urgency. I think that I need to do everything now. I actually probably should have done it yesterday, which is a double-edged sword, like I said, because you're overextending, you do things too fast. But if you have the right mindset and a can-do attitude, you work out all of those other issues, right? Which is exactly why I've done. So just to recap on there, the three things is obviously income. Without income, there's none of this stuff. So forget about it. You need a mentor. You need someone you can follow in the footsteps. It's much faster to follow in someone else's footsteps than to create your own. You need urgency because to do all of this stuff in 10 years doesn't happen by waiting. Like, I've literally, if I look at my post-it notes in front of me here, there's like, hasn't been a year where I haven't really done anything, right? Like, there was a year or two there where I said I waited for my income to grow, but I was still doing something, right? Like, the year that I waited for my income to grow from when I moved from Sydney to Newcastle, I still moved to Newcastle. I'm still doing shit. I moved to Newcastle. I started a new job. I got that increased income. Then I made a move. So I'm still acting with urgency and making the decision to go, yes, I need to do this because this is going to get me to there. When I moved from Newcastle back to Sydney to get into the real estate sector, I was still doing the doing, right? There's all the shit that happens behind closed doors. I had to get my real estate license. I joined a mastermind so I could learn before I was in the industry. I had to make all the plans to go and find where I was going to work and, set myself up so I had enough money to bridge myself over, because I went from earning an income to not earning any income because I was a contractor. So there's all these things that happen behind the titles of what I'm saying. So you must act with urgency if you want a big goal. If you don't want a big goal, don't do it. Now, another thing is, outside of mentors, it is always easier to do it as a team, okay? Having people next to you to do it. Like I said, I bought my office building with a joint venture with my business partner. I've done other joint ventures in here where, I combined something that I didn't have with something that I did have to create something out of nothing. I've now got a huge team around me that make all this stuff happen. So it's very hard to do it by yourself, right? You need the mentor, but then you need the implementation. You need a broker, you need an accountant, all the standard shit you need as a property investor. But then all the other people outside of that, who do you reach out to when shit goes wrong? That's the people you need. So for me, I've joined every business group that I possibly could. The Entrepreneurs Organization I joined as soon as I started my business. I've since graduated into YPO, which is Young Presidents Organization, bigger businesses, bigger problems. So it's always having people around you that you can lean on when things aren't going well. It's easy when things are going right. You think like you have all the answers to life, right? But when things are not going well, that's when you need people to lean on. And the last thing I believe is you need to be curious and you need to have no ego. Now, people are going to watch and go, oh, Jack, no ego. What I mean by no ego is I often think that people get ego confused with confidence, right? I'm an extremely confident person. I act like I know exactly what I'm doing all the time. But the reality is there's been so many things that I've done wrong on this journey, right? And I'm more than happy to admit them. I don't pretend like I know everything because I know very little. So that's the thing with no ego. It's like, if I've done something wrong, if I've made a mistake, if I've put myself in a squirrely situation, I have no ego in asking someone, how the fuck do I get out of what I've gotten myself into? What should I do here? And it's essentially always being a student, right? And the curiosity piece is always exploring new things, always looking at, could that work for me? Have I been doing things wrong, or have I had the wrong belief that's been holding me back, right? Like, I can assure you, buying farmland today back in year one, if someone said go buy farmland, I would have answered that with, nah, farmland's not a good investment. You shouldn't buy it, right? Because I didn't know about farmland, but because I got curious and I understood things, I'm learning from people. I'm like, I now have a different belief system to what I would have had back in the first year of my investing journey. Being curious around things, always exploring, always taking feedback, always asking questions, and having no ego is the most important thing, because an ego will kill you. You have to check mine consistently, but it is honestly one of the most important pieces of the puzzle. So in summary, that is me summarizing the last 10 years of my investing journey in give or take an hour. So there's a lot more pieces to this puzzle, right? I've given you the headlines, the summaries. I've given you all the things I've done right, all the things I've done wrong when I've bought things. You're probably thinking, well, Jack, that was great. It sounds amazing. You've probably G'd me up to go and have a crack, but what can I actually do with this information? The first thing you need to do is not just have it as information, you need to go and execute off the back of it. If there's anything that you've taken away from this, you need to go implement it. Because I can assure you, I was the person sitting on the other end of the camera watching it. You're probably sitting on your bed, on your laptop, or whatever it is on your phone. That was me, watching Chris Gray, watching Nathan Birch, watching all these guys who were way ahead of me. And the only reason I'm here is because I implement and I execute, okay? And I'm still the person watching Alex Hormozy and all these other people online. So you need to take all the lessons and go and implement what is relevant to you. Now, I'm 29, right? So I've got a long way ahead of me and I'm not really thinking about retirement right now, but a lot of people are thinking about retirement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another video where I talk you through, you've got the portfolio now, how do I now gear myself up for retirement? Because that is what everyone wants at the end of the day. They want freedom. So I'm going to do a video where I talk through exactly how I gear myself up and how we gear up our clients for retirement so they can enjoy income, work less, watch more Jack Henderson videos on YouTube, and just enjoy a really good life. So if you haven't liked or subscribed to my channel, go and do that. You hear that on every single video. And until I see you next time, go hard.